Welcome back to the OMB Law Board. I'm Simon Bennett, and today we're going to have life outside the courtroom where law meets industry. I'm so blessed to have a titan of the entertainment and sporting industry, a larger-than-life personality, a great friend of mine and OMB, Tony Cochrane AM, and he is going to entertain us today. Of that, I can assure you. Tony, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, buddy. I'll legally correct you. It's an AM, not an IAM. I'm a bit further up the chain, luckily.
I've always relied on you for your technical technical skill, and we'll get to that because, you're way up the chain, and that is for certain. And I'm really pleased to have you, and thanks for taking your time out of your extremely busy schedule to spend a few minutes
Happy
with
to
us.
be here.
Fantastic. So, Tony, as I said, wonderful relationship we have. I've been involved in some organisations with you, and I've seen you operate, and I think you've got some wonderful insights for our listeners today, so I really look forward to drilling into that. I want to get back to the start of the Tony Cochrane story. An Adelaide boy, like my mother, didn't have the greatest relationship with school.
No, school and I had a symbiotic relationship. School hated me and I hated it, so it worked perfectly well.
And, that wasn't the right course for you and that wasn't the right angle. So you left school and got on and got into production, lighting, sound work and that sort of stuff in Adelaide.
Yeah, well, I actually got into it with a schoolmate kid who lived down the road before I left school. So we had the business established from I must have been about 16 because I certainly had my driver's license. I basically I left school before I finished high school because I had the business up and running, and I left school and kept running with it and kept growing it. And I did that on the basis I conned my parents. They said, look, in those days, because I'm 1,000 years old, in those days they used to say, well, there's night school. If you never finished high school, in those days there was night school if you didn't go to university. And I agreed I'd go to night school and finish my year 12 if the need came up, but I never went back.
The need never came back, and another one fell to the charms of Tony Cochrane, as I have, and I'll explain that one later. But what a masterstroke that was for you getting into the entertainment industry. And then I think the story really begins from there, because the big break came when you were involved in the promotion of Sanctuary Cove for Mike Gore. And that was really, as I see it, the beginning of the Tony Cochrane story.
Yeah, it was the beginning of the story in terms of a public sense, I guess. 10 years elapsed in that period of time. I grew the business at Adelaide High Watt Lighting into a fairly substantive business. I had started towards the end of that to get into bigger production things. I had done a fairly big production thing with Peter Allen. And a couple of other things. Did the South Australia Sesquicentenary 150th anniversary of the founding of South Australia, which was a very big New Year's Eve show, and some other bits and pieces that went off that. So I had started to morph myself away from production, as in lighting and sound, and morph myself into producing and the like. And I had been involved in the entertainment of the final two Grand Prix in Adelaide with a guy who was the chief engineer called Bob Bernard. And Bob Bernard had gone out on his own with a group of like-minded individuals and set up Bernard Corporation to go and do big event things. And they landed the contract to get Sanctuary Cove. They didn't have any entertainment expertise. Sanctuary Cove wanted to have an entertainment part to it. So I came in as the consultant on the entertainment for what became the opening of Sanctuary Cove, what became the ultimate event.
The ultimate event. Interesting byplay there, the involvement in the Grand Prix in Adelaide as your career circled back into motorsport. Yeah. So I didn't know that, which is very interesting. And I won't go all through the details, but the famous piece for the Sanctuary Cove, the ultimate event, was you travelled across to America and ended up landing the great Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, well, it's a very long story, and this story's been hacked by the media over many years, and they've got me
Yep.
sleeping in Sinatra's house and all sorts of stuff, and none of which is true. Um, but we started out Mike Gore, who was a larger than life character, and
Yep.
love them or hate them, Mike Gore, the Christopher Scases of the world, and all these characters I've dealt with over my career. You know, 10 out of 10, because without them, the Gold Coast and Port Douglas and places like that would have never been developed in the way they have been. So they were great. Keith Williams was another one. They
Yep.
were great people at Catalyst and doing things against great odds. And in a time when, it was a bit more of a cowboy mentality, certainly here in Queensland. So, yes, Mike Gore wanted Neil Diamond. And I failed to deliver on Neil Diamond.
So that's a great point. I love that, because I think that's kind of a message that some of our listeners can attain to. The story is that you end up landing the biggest fish there was, but it actually came about through failure to get your first target, which was one of the biggest entertainers in the world at the time, Neil Diamond.
Yeah. Well, he was only 6 years off Hot August Night, which was the biggest album at that time ever. Subsequently, Thriller has become, and a couple of others. But so he was a huge name. And I knew his manager, Sandy Gallen in LA, reasonably well. And Sandy was dead keen on the deal, as a manager would be, because he got 10%. And I had $1 million to spend for one night, which was a shitload of money in 1987.
Still a lot of money.
Still a lot of money today, but a lot of money back then. And so he thought we were a shoo-in. I thought we were a shoo-in. And of course, Neil said no. And then I spent a lot of time hacking around the world trying to solve the problem, and subsequently put a lot of hours in somebody's reception in Fort Lauderdale, who was Frank Sinatra's manager, Elliot Weissman. And I signed Sinatra and convinced Sinatra to come back to Australia after he vowed and declared he would never return.
Come back. And the things I love about that story, Tony, two things. Number one, you signed him with money you weren't authorised to spend.
Yeah, well, that's the best way to sign anybody.
And that sums you up completely.
Yeah.
Not only did you agree to pay an exorbitant amount of money, you agreed to pay his tax and all these things, which you didn't have the imprimatur to do at the time. The other bit I loved about that story, and for our listeners who haven't heard it, go back and look into Tony a bit more. You'll find all the details. But I love the piece where you finally, after camping out for a week in the manager's office, you got 5 minutes, and it was, don't bother sitting down, you're on your way.
Yeah.
But you did something really special, and I bring a lot of this into what I try to do, and I that's why it resonated with me. You found a connection.
Yeah, so Elliot was old school mafia ties. I didn't even know really who the mafia was. I was young and naive. I think it was 32 or 3 or something like that. And I walked into his palatial office. He had a desk that he could have landed an aircraft on, and 2 massive chairs, and I shook his hand and proceeded to sit down, and in my best mafia impersonator's voice, he said, "Don't fucking sit down. There's no need to fucking sit down. This meeting's going to be fucking 3 minutes." And so taken back, and I've always been pretty good at talking and trying to hang in there, as it were. And I happened to notice up behind him on the wall, he had these fantastic model trains, HO scale, mounted on the wall. And I've always been a bit of a fascinator for HO scale modelling. And I just said, "Oh, look, wow, they look like they're are they handmade models? They look amazing." And, he was, "Yeah, how the fuck do you know that?" So I went, "Do you mind if I go over and have a look?" Yeah, okay. So we spent the first 20 minutes of my non-existent 2 to 3 minutes talking about HO scale run, and then he asked me to sit down, and I got a coffee, and I left 2.5 hours later.
Yeah, the importance of that one piece of connection, but for that.
Critical. Yeah. So my best advice mentoring young people is try and find a way to connect, and be prepared to hang in there and keep the connection rolling. Don't make it, never make it seem disingenuous. If you're going to be disingenuous, don't connect. But if you can make it genuine, that connection and let it build a bit, and it just builds a bit of rapport between people, and it can quite often break the ice. Sometimes it won't, but it can quite often break the ice, and away you go. And I'm a great believer, and you've been around me enough to know this. I'm not big on the word no. I much prefer yes. So I will hang in there, and I'll convince people they didn't really want to say no. They actually wanted to say yes. They just had to find a way to say it.
Well, I think that's a fantastic skill. And it kind of leads into the next thing I wanted to talk about was that was a difficult situation for you. You hung in, you beat adversity on the first failure, and then you found a connection. But dealing with difficult people and through the production, and, there's been some massive personalities that you've dealt with. Most recently, I think the Rolling Stones, which we had the pleasure of attending the exhibit with you, and other big personalities through your production career. Interesting, from a legal perspective, contract clauses or riders that some of these people may have put you through and over the journey, I'm sure would have been interesting.
I've had, so many crazy stories over so many years. I think it was Kiss, and this is way back in I'm going to say late 80s, maybe early 90s. I think it was Kiss that, in their rider they had, the Americans don't call them Smarties, they call them something else. They've got a different name. It's the same chocolate-coated, coloured confectionery. Anyway, they had a rider. I'll use the word Smarties. It wasn't Smarties, but using the American term. They needed a bowl of Smarties beside the stage, but it couldn't have any red ones in it. And the bowl had to be the bowl was even described how big it had to be.
Did you pick them out, or did you have an assistant?
I had somebody pick them out. But I mean, you dealt with so many nut things. Somebody wanted a wine, but it had to be exactly delivered at this temperature. And of course, we've had a squillion and one silly ones like that. I'll go back to Century Cove though, since we just talked about Century Cove. So when I got the deal up to do Century Cove, my deal was in negotiation with Mike Gore, and I wanted 10% of what I spent. And that was a bit of an alien concept.
Well, particularly given that you were spending money that you weren't supposed to. You just kept upping the number.
But that was because I wanted the freedom to be aggressive. Anyway, so I nutted out over an argument over Mike Gore's board table at Century Cove. I nutted out my deal in Tony Cochrane legal speak.
Yes.
And my dear friend, he's no longer with us, Ian Edgley, was my lawyer in those days in Adelaide, because, my office until that time was, I had an office in Sydney, an office in Adelaide. And Adelaide used to take care of all the legal stuff because of the relationship with Ian, came from a very long-standing legal business in Adelaide. And so this is preceding mobile phones and everything, of course. In those days, I faxed him a copy of my dot point legal agreement that I had structured. And of course, he came, I said, put it into a contract, get it up to me. We're going, Ariadne owned 50% of Century Cove in those days, and we were going up to meet with Ariadne. Gore was taking me up the following week, bring your contract, we'll get it signed, we'll get cracking, I want to get going, sort of stuff. And so I sent this to Ian, and I said, Ian, just knock a contract together. Well, about an hour later, he's on the phone, and he says, Tony, Ariadne are a publicly listed company. There is no way on God's earth I sign a contract that you get paid 10% of what you spent. And I said, Ian, I asked you to put a contract together. I didn't ask you to negotiate the terms. That's my job. So it was a valuable lesson for Ian. It's
a valuable lesson I've learnt with Tony as well. And it's an interesting dynamic sometimes between the entrepreneur and the lawyer where, the deal is negotiated and we need to bear in mind what our role in that task is. So
well, sometimes my greatest advice to the lawyers that are listening is, one of my big criticisms of lawyers over the years is sometimes they're not professional listeners, and I think first and foremost a lawyer needs to be a professional listener and hear what his client hopes to achieve, then advise him accordingly if it's outside the box. But it's important sometimes, and by nature, I've always been quite entrepreneurial. I just can't help myself. But, a lot of people aren't necessarily not entrepreneurial, but they're very clear in really what they want to achieve. And sometimes listening, gets you there quicker.
Yeah, good point. Just quickly, we see wonderful productions and shows that you've put on. They seem to go seamlessly, no problems at all. Any near escapes, backstage mishaps that
Oh,
our
no,
listeners wouldn't be aware of that, where things nearly came crashing down?
look, the entertainment industry and to some degree the sporting industry is, behind the scenes quite a fuck up from time to time in sort of vernacular terms. Um, the truth of the matter is that anybody who's in the entertainment business that says to you everything's gone smoothly, I've never lost any money in this business, statements like that, they're just lying through their teeth. Um, you can, I remember I produced quite a bit on Broadway in my SEL time, and in the space of a year, we kind of went from the penthouse to the shithouse. We had a really successful show. We were ground floor producers on. I won a Tony for it with my partners in Hairspray. Massive success, outstanding success. I think at the end of that 7 and a bit years it ran on Broadway, we returned something like 3,000% to our investors. Wow. Tremendous success. But in that same first year, I got involved with a group of producers in New York, and we were really committed that we had the rights to the Beach Boys music, and we were going to produce a musical based around the hits of the Beach Boys. And I just thought it was an absolute surefire success. And it opened and shut in 3 months, and I dropped a couple of $1 million. So one moment I was king of the kids, and in a very short space of time you're down in the gutter again. And it's a great lesson in that business. And just to prove how bizarre that business can be, we were back in New York with a guy named John Frost, a very successful Australian producer. Frosty and I did a lot of stuff together over the years. And we got taken out to lunch by one of the principal partners of who'd put the Beach Boys thing together. And they said, look, over lunch, look, we're really sorry. The Beach Boys thing didn't work out and you've lost a fair bit of money and that was really bad. But the good news is we've got something really exciting for you to invest in. We think this could be, as a, producing partners, we can get back together and we've ground floor in this show. We think it's got great legs. And I said, yeah, sure, what is it? And it started to tell the story of what became Jersey Boys about, using the music of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons and their story of their early years. And I went, stop immediately. If you think I'm doing another show based on music from the 60s and 70s, you're completely wrong. I'm not having a bar, but well, of course, Jersey Boys went on to be an outstanding success.
Another wonderful decision.
Yeah, another wonderful decision. So, life is not paved with gold.
It's true. So let's move to the sport. We've definitely have sport in common. I think where I'd like to introduce the sporting component. You've had a wonderful and interesting relationship with government. We won't get too much into that, but as I understand the story, Queensland government called you in. There was issues with Gold Coast Indy. Tony come in and help sort it out, and your reintroduction, if you like, to that motorsport world and Group A racing at the time?
Group A touring cars. So again, it's a very long story and long-winded because it took place over probably a 2-year period, and you have to try and tell it in 5 minutes. But so what happened was the Gold Coast had been running the Indy for about, I'm going to say 3 years. It could have been 4. The government was underwriting it. It had lost nearly $80 million. It was an absolute, bear in mind we're talking mid-90s now, so it was a lot of money. The then Premier of the day, whose name escapes me just at the moment, nice guy, called me up for a meeting. I had sold out my early business. I was working for 1 year, supposedly 1 year, turned into 4. The only time I've ever really worked for anybody else in my life, I was working for IMG. And I had successfully pulled the New South Wales government out of the shit with the bike Grand Prix at Eastern Creek, which the Auto Cycle Union of New South Wales had been running and went bankrupt. So I turned that around, and then unfortunately New South Wales government lost the 500cc bike Grand Prix back to Phillip Island. Jeff Kennett stepped in as the new Premier down in Victoria, and the Premier at the time up here had the problem with Indy. He called me up, went to a meeting, is there any way you could look at taking this over? And, we got to get off the government books, and, we're prepared to put funding in each year, but we can't keep wearing these losses. So we took it over and we turned it around in 1 year. We turned it from a sea of red ink to black ink. government of the day were highly appreciative, and so I'd had these couple of big successes in motorsport, which I had never been really involved in up to then, not on the sporting side. And I decided, well, there's a lot of money in motorsport, isn't there? And so I did what I called a white paper. I did this backgrounding, went around Australia, had a look at how Group A touring cars were running, because it was the main form of Australian motorsport. And I just assumed it was a success, but I thought I could do a better job of it. Cut a long story short, I invented a company. I love acronyms. I invented a company called the Australian V8 Supercar Company, which was Avesco.
Yep.
It's the initial company. I changed the name of Group A touring car, which sounded like a blood disorder, to V8 Supercars, which was slightly more marketable. We set up a little office here on the Gold Coast with 2.5 people. We had a part-time receptionist and Gary Craft, myself. And away we went. I talked the teams into forming a partnership in Avesco. They all got a slice of the action. We kept 25%. And I had to pay, because it became sort of legendary part of the story now, because a lot of people wrote up, it took 56,000, turned into 305 million. That came about because we had to buy out IMG. IMG, we'd spent a little bit of time in my IMG days working on this proposal. So we had to pay 56,000 to, satisfy IMG and get them out of the picture. And away we went, and of course turned V8 Supercars into a household name, and took it all over the world. And it was just a great success story. A lot of great people in pit lane. A lot of people helped make that happen. Things like that. People look at you and say you're the success behind it, but it takes a village to make something like that a success. And we had a great village and a lot of good people. A lot of people jumped and got involved, and we built it and built it and built it. And we sold out to private equity in 2011 for a valuation of 305 million. So
yeah, not bad, turning $50,000 into that.
Yeah, and they made a lot of people up and down the pit lane into millionaires, and some of them already were.
But I think it was the ability to see the opportunity, and that's, I think, what our listeners will get is see the opportunity, understand what your strengths are to bring to what was the Group A, turn it into a rebranded, the invent of the way you introduced the television, the proper coverage, not just at Bathurst, but throughout the whole course. The way that the drivers and the teams became personalities in their own right, and it created this fantastic venture. So I think the opportunity mixed with the skills that you developed was a perfect mix.
Yeah, and again, there was a lot of tough times. There was a lot of times where, I said before, I thought Group A was very successful. I got inside the tent, discovered it was basically trading insolvent. They owed money all over the place. So the first 2 years in particular, probably the first 3 years, we looked like I was probably a bit of a duck. On the surface, I looked like I was calm and sorting everything out nicely, and underneath my little legs were going for all they were worth, because we had to do a lot of work. That 96, late 96 through about 2000, probably 2001, it was really, really hard yards. We were earning every cent we could get in the door, and building up the business. And but life lesson there for everybody listening. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen on autopilot. You've got to be prepared to put the hard work in.
So let's move on to footy. Another joint love of ours, and Tony, past chairman of the Gold Coast Suns, brought me onto the board there. Talking about not taking no for an answer, or not necessarily always telling the incomplete truth.
Parts of it were true.
I remember when, you mentioned to me, I said, well, what would be involved? And you said, it's one meeting a month. It's 4 hours at the most. 4 hours at the most, 1 month. That's unbelievable. And
did I say 4 or 40? I think I said.
I think you said 4, but I heard 4, but it turned out to be about 40. But it's been a wonderful venture, and you're still in love. With AFL, originally being a Sturt man from Adelaide, but Gold Coast Suns, your true love now, and a great supporter, and the greatest advocate and passionate advocate and supporter for the Gold Coast Suns. And we're constantly battling the southern states to get what we think is competitive balance, and they continue to attack our academy, etc.
Sure.
It's it's a hard barrow to push, but you're passionate about sport and big sporting organisations on the Gold Coast.
Yeah, look, I am, and one of my great loves of life, and it's one of the great pleasures of my life has been that AFL has given me so much joy over the years as a fan that it was wonderful to have the opportunity to pay back and serve a term on the board and then serve a much longer term as president and fight the good fight and try and get, things established. Because one of the things about that kind of sporting experience from an administration point of view is, again, I urge people to take this approach if they get involved in sporting ventures of that nature, is that you are there to do a job. You're to try and advance the ball and get it, get the whatever the organisation is a bit better set up, a bit further forward, a bit more established, and then you hand over to the next person and they carry the ball, using that expression, they carry the ball a bit further and you build on. Because, a lot of sporting organisations take an enormous amount of time to get it properly established and get to what is regarded out there as a bench level of success, unless you've got, unlimited money and you've got, no rules. And some sports around the world have that. So, you can, very interesting in the valuation of sport. I never thought I'd live to see this, but yesterday the Lakers was sold for a valuation of $10 billion.
Yeah.
If you had said to me even 5 years ago, a basketball team will be sold for $10 billion, I would have said you're on drugs. So, sport is becoming omni-important in the world of finance, of commerce, and it's way, way gone beyond sport now, as we used to know it. So, the whole thing's an interesting dynamic, and it's a great pond to play in. But again, if you're not prepared to do the hard yards, don't get involved, because anybody who thinks it's easy, I'll get in there, I'll turn this around in 3 years' time. Yeah, like hell you will. It's hard yards, but it's so gratifying. When you do have those moments, and you've now had those moments as chair of the football subcommittee, they are special moments, and you can't help yourself. You get slowly but surely dragged in. It's like trying to swim against an impossible tide. Eventually you decide, I'm going to go with the tide.
You knew it, didn't you? You knew it. So, I'm all in. One of the things, I think the interesting byplay there is I was the lawyer, and this was our first business interaction. And Tony, as a general statement, don't take this the wrong way, you have very little regard for the legal complexities and the importance of legal, but your whole career has been based off good contractual agreements, because otherwise you wouldn't have landed each of those deals. And the byplay between the lawyer and the entrepreneur, or the driver, if you like, was an interesting dynamic, because you appreciated the value of doing it, but didn't have a great deal of interest in the detail and just assumed that gets done. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that's pretty true. I think you've heard me use this expression quite a bit, but one of my great creeds that I run with in life, it's easier to ask for permission than it is to ask for forgiveness. Sorry, easier other way around. Anyway, I do think that's important. I do think it's important to sometimes plough on, take the hard path, and then hopefully you've got a good lawyer behind you who can clean it up and knock it into legal speak, legal shake, as I said, because, a lot of people want to go, straight into the legal position. And of course, sometimes that's very important and sometimes that's the absolute way to go. But equally, I think there's some good merit in trying to hang in there and argue out and nut out a position before you bring in the lawyer, as it were.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the big lessons that I learned throughout that course, and we won't talk specifics on the details, but where the law was quite specifically one way and you just went completely the opposite way and said, no, I don't care. And ultimately the result fell your way, and we got the result based on a good commercial outcome rather than what the legal document said. So I think, that's a good lesson.
Ask for forgiveness and permission.
It's a good lesson for any of our lawyers listening along today. Tony, we could talk for hours. But I appreciate, we've got a lot else to get you to.
Sure.
I thank you for coming in. I think our listeners and our viewers would have absolutely enjoyed their time with you today. I know I did, and I think anyone who's got any comments or questions, drop a link below and we'll get back to you. But Tony, thanks for coming in. Always a pleasure.
No trouble. All the best, Simon.
And thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.